The silver ship of the Tellurians reflected the sunlight as it quietly entered Earth's orbit. Inside, Commander Nera stood with perfect posture, her pale blue skin almost glowing under the ship's lights. She stared at the viewing screen with a mixture of curiosity and revulsion. "Record this observation," she instructed, her voice crisp and formal. "Day 1 of Earth monitoring has confirmed initial reports. The dominant species continues to display concerning behaviors." Officer Quan, her loyal second-in-command, nodded and added notes to his tablet. His fingers moved quickly across the surface, documenting everything they saw below. "Shall I prepare the detailed hygiene report for the Council?" Quan asked. Nera's four-fingered hand waved dismissively. "Yes. Include all footage of their food preparation rituals. The Council needs to understand why we classified humans as primitive." The Tellurians had discovered Earth 3 cycles ago through their deep space scanning program. At first, they had been excited to find another intelligent species. That excitement quickly turned to disgust as they observed human habits. "Look at this settlement," Nera said, zooming the cameras onto a small town. "They live surrounded by their own waste products. They allow lower life forms to dwell in their homes. They consume fermented foods deliberately." Quan's face showed the appropriate level of disgust. The Council was right to ban direct contact. The ship continued its silent orbit, capturing images of humans going about their daily lives. The Tellurians watched families eating dinner, doctors treating patients, farmers working fields. Each observation only confirmed their beliefs. Later that day, the research team gathered in the ship's clean room. 5 scientists, each wearing the silver uniform of the Tellurian Science Division, waited for Nera's briefing. "We will establish a ground station," Nera announced. "The Northern Hemisphere has a remote area with minimal human presence. We will observe from there without detection." Scientist Jin, the team's biology expert, raised her hand. "Commander, are protective suits sufficient? Human environments contain millions of microorganisms. Our suits are designed for environments far more hostile than Earth," Nera assured her. "Still, decontamination protocols will be doubled. No chances will be taken." The team prepared the landing shuttle, loading research equipment and setting up containment fields. The ship's AI selected a landing spot in a mountain range, far from human settlements, but close enough to observe a small town. As the shuttle descended through clouds, the team got their first direct view of Earth's surface. Forests stretched below them, green and wild. Mountains rose in the distance, capped with white snow. "So much uncultivated land," observed Officer Quan. "Inefficient, but rich in biodiversity," Jin countered, her scientific curiosity momentarily overcoming her caution. "The samples we can collect here will be valuable." The shuttle touched down in a small clearing. Through the windows, they could see tall trees swaying in the wind. Birds flew overhead, curious about the strange object that had appeared. Nera activated her suit's protective field. "Remember, nothing touches your skin. All samples go directly into containment units." The team exited the shuttle in single file. Their silver suits stood out starkly against the natural colors of the forest. Each Tellurian carried sampling equipment and scanners. "First impressions?" Nara asked, recording notes for her report. "The air contains 76 different pollen types," Jin reported, checking her scanner. "And countless microorganisms. It's remarkable humans can breathe this without falling ill." They moved carefully through the forest, collecting samples and scanning the environment. Despite their disgust, they were thorough scientists. Every observation was recorded, every unusual finding noted. After walking for 1 hour, they reached a position overlooking the small town. From their vantage point, they could see humans moving about, unaware of the alien observers. "Begin monitoring," Nara ordered. "Focus on hygiene behaviors, food practices, and waste management." The team set up their equipment, camouflage from human detection. Through powerful lenses, they watched people shopping, eating at outdoor restaurants, playing with dogs in parks. They touched their pets and then their food without cleaning, noted scientist Min with clear disgust. How have they not extinct themselves through disease? Their immune systems must be extraordinarily robust, Jin replied, making notes, which suggests frequent exposure to pathogens throughout their evolution. As night fell, the team continued their observations. They watched through windows as humans prepared evening meals, often using their hands to mix ingredients. They saw humans greeting each other with physical contact, handshakes, hugs, kisses on cheeks. The Council will never approve contact with such a species, Quan said quietly. Nara nodded in agreement. Our mission is clear. We observe, we report, we leave without a trace. The next morning, the team expanded their research area. They collected soil samples, water from streams, and observed smaller life forms. Their disgust remained, but professional curiosity drove them forward. On the third day, they detected human activity near their observation point. A single human male walked through the forest, stopping occasionally to examine plants or take notes. A scientist of sorts, Jin observed through her viewer. He's collecting botanical samples. Move back, Nara ordered. We cannot risk detection. The team retreated deeper into the forest, but continued to monitor the human from afar. He worked methodically, labeling his samples and recording observations in a small book. Despite their primitive nature, some show scientific curiosity, Jin noted. Basic pattern recognition is not the same as true science, Quan countered. For 2 weeks, the Tellurian team continued their research. They established a permanent observation post hidden among the trees, with sensors monitoring human activities in the nearby town. Every day, they collected data to support their classification of humans as primitive. The report is nearly complete, Nara told her team one evening. The Council will receive our recommendation to maintain distance from Earth for at least 100 cycles more. None of the Tellurians questioned this conclusion. The evidence seemed clear to them. Humans were intelligent enough to be dangerous, but lacked the basic hygiene understanding that any truly advanced civilization required. They could not know that their careful mission would soon be disrupted, or that their deepest beliefs about humans would be challenged by one quiet man living alone in these same mountains. The warning alarm sounded throughout the small Tellurian research vessel. Red lights flashed as the ship's computer announced. Solar radiation spike detected. Shield failure imminent. Nara rushed to the control panel, her fingers moving quickly across the display. How did we miss this? Earth's sun wasn't supposed to flare today. Officer Quan checked the navigation systems. The solar event is occurring on the far side, but it's massive. The radiation is bending around the planet's magnetic field. The 5 Tellurians worked frantically to stabilize their systems. The small vessel shook as the first wave of radiation hit them. We need to land immediately, Nara decided. The atmosphere will provide some protection. But Commander, Scientist Jin protested, landing means possible human contact. Better that risk than certain death in orbit, Nara replied firmly. Prepare emergency descent. They strapped themselves into their seats as Quan programmed a course for their mountain observation area. The ship dropped rapidly through Earth's atmosphere, systems failing one by one. Controls unresponsive. Quan called out as the vessel spun wildly. Brace for impact. The Tellurian ship crashed through the forest canopy, snapping trees like twigs before slamming into the earth. Inside, equipment tore loose from walls. Sparks flew from damaged circuits. Silence followed the crash. Smoke filled the cabin. Nara regained consciousness first, tasting blood in her mouth. She looked around at her team. Quan lay motionless beside her. Scientist Jin was trying to free her leg from under fallen equipment. The others weren't moving. Emergency protocols. Nara coughed out. Check life support first. Jin's scanner showed bad news. Air filtration is down. Earth's atmosphere is leaking in. Contaminants. Nara asked, her training taking over despite her injuries. Off the scale, Jin confirmed. We have minutes before full exposure. Nara made a quick decision. Emergency suits. We need to get Quan and the others out. They barely managed to pull on their protective gear when the ship's remaining power failed. Darkness engulfed them. Only the faint light from emergency bands on their suits remained. Can you walk? Nara asked Jin, noticing her injured leg. I think it's broken, Jin admitted, but I can move. Together, they started checking their teammates. Engineer Sun was alive but unconscious with a head wound. The others showed no life signs. Nara felt the weight of command pressing down on her. Outside the ship, Han was hiking his usual morning route when he saw the object tear through the sky. Whatever it was, it had crashed less than a mile from his cabin. Curiosity and concern drove him forward. Han had lived alone in these mountains for 15 years. At 62, his body was lean and tough from mountain life. He moved quickly through the forest, following the trail of broken trees. When he reached the crash site, he stopped in shock. The silver object was like nothing he'd ever seen, clearly not a plane or helicopter. As he watched, a section of it opened, and two figures emerged. Han ducked behind a tree. The figures were humanoid, but clearly not human. Their skin was pale blue, their limbs too long and thin. They wore silver suits that seemed to glow slightly. One was helping the other walk. Han's first instinct was to run. Instead, he watched as they struggled to pull a third figure from the wreckage. They seemed injured and desperate. They need help, he whispered to himself. Years of solitude hadn't erased his humanity. Han stepped into the clearing, hands raised to show he meant no harm. Hello, are you hurt? The blue beings froze. The taller one pushed the injured one behind her protectively. Nara could not believe their terrible luck. A human had found them. Their mission was compromised, and they were in no condition to defend themselves. The translator in her damaged suit struggled to process the human speech. No closer, she warned, though she knew the human couldn't understand her. Han stopped, seeing their fear. He pointed to himself. My name is Han. I want to help. He pointed to his cabin in the distance, then made a motion of carrying someone. He repeated this several times, hoping they would understand. Nara and Jin exchanged glances. Their suits were losing power. The unconscious Sung needed medical attention they couldn't provide. They had no choice. We accept the human's assistance, Nara decided reluctantly. It's our only chance of survival. Han approached slowly. Up close, the aliens looked even stranger, but their injuries were obvious. One was unconscious, another limping badly. He gestured that he would carry the unconscious one. Nara felt sick at the thought of a human touching them, but nodded permission. Han carefully lifted Sung over his shoulder. Nara supported Jin, and they began the slow walk to Han's cabin. The journey took nearly an hour. Each step was agony for Jin, and Nara's own injuries made supporting her difficult. Han led the way, occasionally looking back to check on them. He said nothing, understanding their caution. Han's cabin was small but sturdy. A main room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen area, and two doors leading to other rooms. Books lined the walls. Scientific equipment sat on a desk by the window. He gently laid Sung on a bed in one room, then showed Nara and Jin to another. Through gestures, he indicated they should rest while he tended to Sung's head wound. Nara wanted to refuse, to keep the human away from her unconscious engineer, but she was too exhausted to argue. She and Jin collapsed onto the bed, their damaged suits barely functioning. The decontamination field is failing, Jin whispered in horror. We're being exposed. Nara checked her own suit's readings. Mine too. Full exposure in minutes. They watched through the doorway as Han cleaned Sung's wound with careful, practiced movements. His hands were steady as he applied some kind of herbal paste to the injury. He appears to have medical knowledge, Jin observed. Or he's making it worse, Nara countered, though without conviction. The human's movements suggested he knew what he was doing. Their suits gave final warning beeps before shutting down completely. For the first time, the Tellurians breathed Earth's air directly. The richness of it was shocking, filled with scents they had no words for. Han returned to check on them. He offered water in clean cups and indicated Jin's leg. His eyes asked permission to examine it. Nera nodded reluctantly. Jin closed her eyes, unable to watch as the human touched her. Han's hands were gentle but confident as he examined the break. He splinted the leg with materials he prepared, working quickly to minimize Jin's pain. When he finished, he moved back, giving them space. He pointed to himself again. Han. Understanding the introduction, Nera pointed to herself. Nara. Then to her companions. Jin. Sung. Han smiled, the first human expression they'd seen up close. Rest now. Safe here. As he left the room, closing the door behind him, Nara and Jin looked at each other in disbelief. We've made contact, Jin whispered. Everything we believed about humans. We don't know anything yet, Nara cautioned. We're injured and at his mercy. This changes nothing about what we've observed of humans as a species. But as sleep claimed her, Nara couldn't help wondering why this human, finding strange creatures from another world, had chosen to help rather than harm them. Morning sunlight filtered through the cabin windows as Nara awoke. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then reality crashed back. The accident, the rescue, the human. She sat up quickly, checking on Jin, who slept beside her. Across the room, Sung had been moved to a second bed, his head bandaged neatly. Nara touched her own face, realizing with horror that she had slept without protection. Earth's microbes had been in contact with her skin for hours. Yet she felt no immediate illness. Strange. A soft knock came at the door. Han entered carrying a tray with 3 steaming cups. He smiled and set the tray on a small table between the beds. Medicine, he said, pointing to the cups. Their translation devices had failed, but this word was clear enough. Nara studied the liquid suspiciously. Taking medicine from a human seemed foolish, yet they had few options. Their medical supplies remained in the crashed ship. Han seemed to understand her hesitation. He picked up 1 cup and took a small sip, showing it was safe. Then he pointed to Sung's bandaged head and made a gesture suggesting improvement. Jin had awakened and watched this exchange. Commander, I believe he's trying to help. Nara nodded reluctantly. We have little choice but to trust him for now. They drank the bitter liquid. It tasted of plants and minerals, nothing like Tellurian medicine. Han watched with obvious concern, then pointed to some bread and fruit he'd left on the tray before stepping out to give them privacy. Over the next 3 days, a routine developed. Han tended their injuries each morning and evening. He changed Sung's bandages, adjusted Jin's splint, and checked Nara's bruised ribs. His touch was always clinical and precise, nothing like the careless physical contact they had observed among humans in the town. On the 4th day, Sung finally regained consciousness. His confusion quickly turned to panic when he realized where they were. A human dwelling, without protection. His voice was weak but horrified. We had no choice, Nara explained. Our suits failed. The ship is damaged beyond repair. Some tried to sit up but fell back, dizzy. The contamination seems less severe than we feared, Jin interrupted, her scientific curiosity evident. I've been observing. This human maintains unusual cleanliness for his species. It was true. Han washed his hands before treating them. He kept his living space orderly. His food preparation area, while primitive, was scrubbed daily. Later that afternoon, Han invited Nara to join him outside. She followed cautiously, still weak from her injuries. He led her to a small garden beside the cabin, where plants grew in neat rows. Medicine, Han explained, pointing to some tall plants with purple flowers. He pantomimed picking the leaves, crushing them, and applying them to a wound. Nara realized he was showing her the source of the treatments he'd been using. She looked closer at the garden, noting the careful organization. Each plant had a small marker with writing she couldn't read. "You study plants," she said, though she knew he couldn't understand her words. Han nodded as if he'd somehow grasped her meaning. He led her to a small shed behind the cabin. Inside was a surprising sight. Microscopes, test tubes, drying racks for plants, and notebooks filled with detailed drawings. "You're a scientist," Nera said with genuine surprise. Han smiled and pointed to himself. "Botanist," he said clearly. This revelation changed something in Nera's understanding. This human wasn't just randomly helpful. He was methodical, knowledgeable. His kindness came with precision. That evening, as Han prepared a meal for them, Nera observed his movements more carefully. Every action had purpose. Nothing was wasted. He worked with a quiet efficiency that reminded her of Tellurian habits. When Jin joined them at the small table, she too noticed these details. "Commander, I think we may have misjudged," she whispered in their language. Sung, still bedridden but improving, was less convinced. One unusual human doesn't change what we know about their species. The next morning brought a new challenge. Sung developed a fever. His skin, normally pale blue, had taken on a purple tinge that alarmed his companions. "It's an infection," Jin diagnosed, using a small medical scanner they'd salvaged from the crash. "Our antibiotics won't work on Earth pathogens." Han recognized the crisis without needing translation. He checked Sung's temperature and breathing, his face serious. Then he grabbed a bag and pointed toward the forest. "I think he's going to look for medicine," Nara told the others. Hours passed. Sung's condition worsened. Jin applied cold compresses to lower his temperature while Nara paced the cabin, worried about both Sung and their absent host. Near sunset, Han returned carrying a bag full of plants. He worked quickly at his preparation table, crushing leaves, boiling roots, filtering liquids. The cabin filled with unfamiliar scents. "What is he doing?" Jin asked, fascinated despite her concern. "Creating medicine, I think," Nara replied. "But will it work on our biology?" Han approached with a cup of dark liquid. He gestured that Sung should drink it. Nara hesitated. This wasn't standard procedure. Tellurian medical protocols were strict about unknown substances. "We have no alternative," Jin reminded her. "Our medicine isn't working." Nara nodded permission. Han carefully helped Sung drink the bitter liquid, then applied a poultice of leaves to his chest. Within hours, Sung's fever began to drop. By morning, the purple tinge had faded from his skin. "Remarkable," Jin said, checking Sung's vital signs. The human created an effective treatment using only local plants. Over the following days, as Sung recovered, communication between the Tellurians and Han improved. They began creating a simple shared vocabulary, pointing to objects and exchanging words. Han proved to be a quick learner, matching Tellurian terms to Earth equivalents. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Han surprised them with a question. "Why stars?" he asked, pointing upward. Nara understood. "We came from there," she replied, pointing to the night sky visible through the window. Han nodded, unsurprised. "Thought so." He pointed to their blue skin, their long fingers. "Different, but same." He tapped his chest, then Nora's, indicating something shared between them. "Intelligence," Nora suggested. "Science." "Yes," Han smiled. "Both learn, both curious." Jin leaned forward. "Why alone?" she asked, gesturing to the remote cabin. Han's face showed an emotion they couldn't quite interpret. People complicated, plants simple. He made a gesture of separation. Better alone. Nara recognized something in this sentiment that crossed species boundaries, a preference for quiet study over social complexity. Perhaps this human was more like them than they had imagined possible. That night, as the Tellurians discussed their situation in private, a new understanding emerged. "We need to reconsider our assessment," Jin argued. "This human has demonstrated intelligence, cleanliness, and scientific method. One exception doesn't change the classification of an entire species, some countered, though with less conviction than before. Nara looked out the window at the stars. Perhaps, she said thoughtfully, we need more data before making final judgments. None of them realized that their time for peaceful observation was running out. 2 weeks had passed since the crash. Sung could now walk short distances. Jin's leg was healing well in its splint. The 3 Tellurians had settled into an unexpected routine with their human host. Each morning, Han taught them Earth words while they shared Tellurian terms with him. They helped in his garden, learning how Earth plants grew. Han showed genuine interest in their world, asking thoughtful questions about Tellurian science and culture. Your people all clean? Han asked one morning as they harvested herbs. Yes, Nara explained. Cleanliness is central to our society. We thought all humans were. She paused, searching for a polite word. Dirty, Han finished with a small smile. Many are, not all. This simple exchange reflected the growing understanding between them. Han wasn't offended by their initial judgment. He seemed to find their differences fascinating rather than threatening. That afternoon, some decided it was time to check the emergency beacon in their crashed ship. Though still weak, he insisted on making the journey. We should know if anyone received our distress signal, he explained. Han led them through the forest to the crash site. The silver vessel lay half buried in soil, its once smooth surface now scarred and dented. Plants had already begun growing over parts of it. Sung crawled inside through the damaged entrance. The interior was dark, but some emergency systems still functioned on backup power. He accessed the communication panel while Nara, Jin, and Han waited outside. When Sung emerged, his face was grave. The beacon activated as designed, he reported in their language. And there's a response. Nara felt relief flood through her. The rescue team is coming. Sung shook his head, his expression troubled. Not exactly. He glanced at Han, then switched to Tellurian language to ensure privacy. Command believes we've been contaminated. They're sending a sterilization unit. Jin gasped. Sterilization. But that would mean complete elimination of all biological matter in a 5-mile radius. Sung confirmed quietly. Us, Han, everything. Nara felt her hearts racing. When? 3 days. Maybe 4. Sung's voice was hollow. Standard containment protocol for high-risk biological exposure. They walked back to the cabin in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Han sensed their mood had changed but didn't press for explanations. That evening, as Han prepared dinner, the Tellurians huddled together to discuss their options. We must warn him, Jin insisted. He saved our lives. And tell him what? Some countered. That our people plan to sterilize this area because of us. That his kindness has condemned him. Nara watched Han through the window as he gathered vegetables from his garden. We need to contact our ship before it arrives. Explain what we've learned. With what? Sung asked bitterly. Our communication array was destroyed in the crash. The emergency beacon only sends automated signals. Jin looked thoughtful. What if we built a new transmitter? One powerful enough to reach orbit. Some laughed without humor. With Earth technology. Impossible. Not entirely, Nara said slowly. Han has scientific equipment. Basic electronics. If we combine that with salvaged parts from our ship. That night, they explained the situation to Han as best they could with their limited shared vocabulary. His reaction surprised them. Instead of panic or anger, he showed determination. Ship coming? He asked, pointing to the sky. Yes, Nara confirmed. Bad ship. Danger. How long? 3 days. Han nodded, processing this information. Need talk to ship. Yes, Jin said. Need strong voice. She pointed to the sky, mimicking a signal. Han understood immediately. Radio. Big radio. He gestured toward his equipment shelf. Can build. The next morning, they began work. Han drove his old truck to town and returned with electronic parts, capacitors, circuit boards, copper wire. Sung and Jin gathered salvageable components from their crashed ship. Nara sketched designs that combined Tellurian communication principles with Earth technology. Han worked tirelessly, his hands steady and skilled. He revealed knowledge of electronics that surprised the Tellurians. "You understand this technology well," Nara observed. Han shrugged. "Before mountains, was engineer." This new information changed their perception again. Han wasn't just a botanist. He was a skilled technician who had chosen a simpler life. As they worked through the second day, Han paused to ask a difficult question. Why ship destroy? The Tellurians exchanged glances. How could they explain their society's fear of contamination? The strict protocols that governed all interactions with other species. "My people fear different," Nara tried to explain. "Think Earth dangerous." "Because dirty?" Han asked with surprising insight. "Yes," Nara admitted. "We thought all humans were. Not clean, not careful." Han nodded thoughtfully. "Many aren't." Then he smiled slightly. "Like your people, maybe. Some different." This simple observation struck Nara deeply. Their entire assessment of humanity had been based on observing the average, the typical. They had never considered the exceptions, the individuals who might bridge their differences. By the end of the second day, the makeshift transmitter was taking shape. Han's cabin was transformed into a workshop, with wires running to a satellite dish he'd mounted on the roof. Sung wrote code that would allow them to broadcast on Tellurian frequencies. On the morning of the third day, they detected the approaching Tellurian ship. Their instruments showed it had entered Earth's orbit, a much larger vessel than their research craft. "Time is running out," Sung warned. "They'll begin scanning procedures soon." The transmitter still needed final adjustments. Han worked frantically, connecting power sources and aligning the dish. Jin helped calibrate the signal while Nara prepared the message they would send. Midday came and went. The Tellurian ship moved into position above their location. Their makeshift equipment detected the first scanning beams sweeping the area. "They're mapping for the sterilization," Sung explained, his voice tense. "Once they complete the scan, they'll launch the procedure." Han made a final connection, and the transmitter hummed to life. Lights flickered across the control panel they'd built. "Now," he said simply, stepping back. Nara took a deep breath and activated the signal. The cabin lights dimmed as power surged to the transmitter. A high-pitched whine filled the air. "Broadcasting," Jin confirmed, watching the instruments. "Signal is reaching orbit." They waited in tense silence, eyes fixed on the receivers. Would their message reach the ship? Would anyone listen if it did? After what seemed like hours but was only minutes, a response came through. The scanning beams ceased. A transmission in Tellurian language filled their makeshift speaker. "Research Team Nara 7, this is Command Vessel Telos. Your unauthorized broadcast has been received. Explain your situation immediately." Nara looked at Han, who had made this possible, this human who had saved them twice now. She picked up the transmitter, ready to challenge everything her people believed about Earth and its inhabitants. The communication device crackled with static as Nara spoke. Her voice was steady despite the pressure. "Command Vessel Telos, this is Commander Nara. We request immediate cancellation of sterilization protocol." Admiral Tay's voice came through clearly. "Denied. Your team has been exposed to Earth contaminants for 17 days. Protocol requires complete sterilization." Nara looked at her companions. Jin nodded encouragement while Sung monitored the signal strength. Han stood quietly by the window, unable to understand the Tellurian words, but reading the tension in the room. "Admiral, we have important new information," Nara continued. "Our assessment of humans was incomplete. We've discovered evidence that challenges our classification." A long pause followed. Finally, Admiral Tay responded. "Explain quickly." Nara described their rescue by Han, his scientific background, his medical knowledge that saved Sung's life. She explained how he helped build the transmitter they were using now. One exceptional case does not change species classification, Admiral Tai replied dismissively. Jin stepped forward, taking the transmitter from Nara. Admiral, scientist Jin speaking. With respect, our initial observations were biased. We focused on population centers where human behavior appears chaotic. We failed to study individuals properly. The protocols exist for good reason. The Admiral countered. Biological contamination has not occurred. Sung interrupted, joining the conversation. We've been exposed to Earth's environment for 17 days without protective equipment. Our medical scans show no dangerous contamination. Human biology is different from ours, but not inherently threatening. The silence that followed stretched longer this time. Han approached, his eyes questioning. Nara tried to explain their situation with simple gestures and words. Your leader's afraid? Han asked softly. Yes, Nara admitted. Fear, different things. Han considered this, then pointed to the transmitter. Let me speak. The Tellurians exchanged surprised glances. He wants to address the Admiral, Jin explained. Impossible, Sung objected. They won't understand him. And the cultural shock might be exactly what they need. Nara finished. She made a decision and adjusted the transmitter. Admiral Tai, we have someone who wishes to address you. He is the human who saved us. Before the Admiral could object, Nara handed the device to Han and quickly explained how to use it. Han cleared his throat and spoke clearly. Hello, my name Han. Your people my guests. Good people. Learn fast. We different, but same too. Both think, both care, both learn. He paused, searching for words. No need destroy. Better to understand. On the command ship, Admiral Tai and his officers stared at each other in shock. For the first time in Tellurian history, they were hearing the human voice addressed directly to them. After a long silence, the Admiral responded. We cannot trust that this situation represents normal human behavior. One individual does not. Nara took back the transmitter. Admiral, that's the point we fail to understand. Humans are not uniform. They are diverse, in habits, in beliefs, in cleanliness. We judge the entire species by their average, not by their potential. The debate continued for hours. The sterilization countdown remained paused but not canceled. Finally, Admiral Tai made an unprecedented decision. I will come to Earth myself. One small shuttle, 3 officers. If what you claim is true, I need to witness it directly. When Nara translated this for Han, he simply nodded and began cleaning his cabin. The Tellurians watched in confusion. What are you doing? Jin asked. Han smiled slightly. Visitors coming. Make things nice. The next morning, a small Tellurian shuttle descended from the clouds. It landed in the clearing near Han's cabin, its engines humming quietly. The door opened, and 3 Tellurians in full protective suits stepped out. Admiral Tai led the group, his tall figure impressive even at a distance. He approached cautiously, scanner in hand, measuring everything around him. Nara, Jin, and Sung stood beside Han on the cabin porch. They had chosen not to wear their damaged suits, a deliberate statement about their trust in Earth's environment. Commander Nara, Admiral Tai greeted formally. Your appearance has changed. It was true. After weeks on Earth, the 3 researchers had developed subtle changes. Their skin had taken on a slightly darker blue hue from sun exposure. Their posture was more relaxed. We have adapted, Admiral. Nara replied simply. Admiral Tai turned his attention to Han. He studied the human carefully through his protective visor. This is the specimen who assisted you. This is Han, Nara corrected. Our host and friend. Han stepped forward and did something unexpected. He extended his hand toward the Admiral. Nara quickly explained to Ta that this was a human greeting gesture. The Admiral stared at the offered hand. Centuries of Tellurian protocols warned against such contact. Every training manual described humans as contaminated organisms to be avoided. Yet before him stood 3 of his own people, exposed but healthy. The moment stretched, heavy with significance. Then, with careful movements, Admiral Ta released the seal on his right glove and removed it. The other officers gasped. He extended his 4-fingered blue hand and clasped Han's 5-fingered one. "Greetings," the Admiral said through his translator. "Welcome," Han replied simply. Inside the cabin, Han served tea to the visitors. Admiral Ta removed his helmet after considerable hesitation, but left the rest of his suit sealed. He examined the living space with intense curiosity. "You maintain unusual cleanliness for a human," he observed. Han smiled. "Science needs clean. Plants need care. Simple." The Admiral turned to Nara. "Show me everything. I want to understand how this human differs from your initial reports." They spent the day touring Han's property. They visited his garden with its orderly rows of medicinal plants. They examined his laboratory equipment and botanical journals. The Admiral was particularly interested in the medicine Han had created to save Sung. "You developed a treatment effective on Tellurian biology using only Earth plants?" he asked, clearly impressed. Han shrugged. "Plants speak certain language. Same across stars. Maybe." That evening, as they shared a meal prepared by Han, Admiral Tai made his decision. He contacted his ship and issued new orders. "The sterilization is canceled," he announced. "Instead, we will establish a permanent research station. With permission," he nodded to Han, "near this location." "To study humans?" Jin asked. "To study cooperation," the Admiral corrected. "This human has shown us something important, that differences need not be threatening. That adaptation is possible." Han, understanding the general meaning if not the specific words, raised his cup. "To learning new things," he said simply. 3 months later, a small Tellurian research base operated at the edge of Han's property. Scientists came and went, studying Earth's environment under less restrictive protocols. Han worked with them, teaching about Earth plants and learning about Tellurian science. Nara remained as the liaison officer. One morning, as she and Han walked through the forest collecting samples, she asked a question that had long been on her mind. "Were you not afraid when you found us after the crash?" Han considered this as he carefully cut a leaf from a plant. "Yes, afraid, but curious more. Curious enough to risk everything." Han smiled. "Life is curious or nothing." He looked up at the sky. "Your people learning this now." Back at the research base, Admiral Ta was preparing a report that would change Tellurian policy forever. It began with simple words. "We thought humans were filthy animals until we met one man. His name is Han, and he has taught us that our greatest contamination was not biological, but in our thinking. The universe is more complex and promising than our fears allowed us to see." On Telluria, children would soon learn a new history of first contact with Earth, not as a dangerous, contaminated world to be avoided, but as the place where one quiet human taught an advanced civilization the most important lesson of all. Difference is not danger, but opportunity.